Hello, everyone, to another episode of the World War II Daily Podcast. This time, we are joined by Bastiaan Willems and Samuel De Corti, my good friend and co host of the show. Before we jump in, we would like to invite you to check out our Instagrams at World War II underscore daily and at Samuel.decorti for daily World War II content and much more. There are great opportunities on Instagram for the listeners of this show. So you don't want to miss it. You have to check Instagram out, our Instagrams out. All the links, all the things featured in this episode, books, or anything we can share with you in a link. The links will be in the description of this episode, along with Bastian's book, which we are going to discuss today. You're going to find the link to buy his book in the description of this episode and afterwards on our Instagram. So let's jump into the episode. Be welcome, Bastian. Um, if I mispronounced your name, I'm so sorry.
No,
Hopefully,
you're doing great. Bastiaan, perfect. Yeah, Bastiaan Willems.
oh,
Yeah.
perfect. Bastian. Okay, perfect. So, would you, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today, for dedicating your
Thanks for
time to
having me.
our show and to our listeners, to our audience. I'm pretty sure they're going to benefit a lot from your expertise and your knowledge. So, would you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, what you do, what is your most recent work, and, well, anything, and how did you get connected with these? The topics we're going to discuss today.
Good. So a lot of questions there. I'll see if I can try to unpack all of them one by one. Yeah. So Bastiaan Willems. I'm a lecturer in the history of war of 20th century Europe at Lancaster University, which is in Britain, and been there for 4 years. And I'm here today particularly to talk about my book, like Violence in Defeat, or like my research pertaining to that, I should say rather. Which examines the retreat of the German army from the Eastern Front onto its own territory. So that is what I am most interested in. So like the final year of the Second World War, and then particularly, and we will be talking about this in great detail, obviously, and the concept of so-called like German versus German violence, or sometimes referred to as intra-ethnic violence. Like that is, I consider myself like a scholar of violence. So my book is also called Violence in Defeat. So like violence in the final year of the Second World War.
Perfect. Um, your book, Violence in Defeat. If you could introduce, if you had to introduce uh, Violence in Defeat to someone who has never heard of Königsberg, how would you explain what your book is about and why this battle matters so much today?
Mhm. So the first thing I would do is actually tell people where it is on the map, because you would not be uneducated if you're listening to this and you go like, man, I've never heard of Königsberg. Where on earth in Germany is it? Well, it is no longer in Germany, right? It is part of these German lands which after the Second World War have been taken from Germany, and now it is part of Russia, actually. If you were to look on a map of Europe, you would find it wedged in between Lithuania and Poland. Right? There's a small exclave which goes by the name Kaliningrad, and this is Kaliningrad is what used to be Königsberg. Stalin takes it over in 1945. Is perfectly content with it and holds on to it, and Russia holds on to it to this day. So that is, like that would be the most like the point of departure, I would say, like just knowing where it is on the map, which incidentally really helps you understand how big Germany used to be. Right? It's like we tend to think when we think about the Second World War, we think like like we tend to still think of it as the Germany of today. Yeah, maybe it's a slightly different size. Like no, it's a massive country. When Germany invades the Soviet Union, it invades a neighbor. Right? There's not many countries over. Right? It's like today Poland lies in between, of course, right? And like all these Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, you name it, lie in between. Like back then, like no, East Prussia, the province that I study, lies right next to like what is then the Soviet Union, right? So that to me is extremely, extremely important, right? So if you listen to the old German national anthem, for example, the anthem that they no longer use, they talk about from the Maas until the Memel River, right? This is in their national anthem, right? So the Maas is still the border. As a matter of fact, we're with a fellow Dutchman here, right? So like the both of us will absolutely know the Maas because it goes to the Netherlands too. But the Memel is not as known to us, right? Memel is all the way up in the northeast of what is then Germany. Now it is the border between Lithuania and Kaliningrad, right? So far, far away, but now no longer a border of Germany. Used to be up till the Second World War, now not anymore. So that is where we are. This part of the world, this part of Europe, we are today. So if you consider that, like then it also becomes a little bit easier to understand where my research is coming from, right? Because what I do is I focus on the retreat of German forces from the Soviet Union up to their own soil, right? So if you then take into account, one day you are in the Soviet Union, the next day you are in Germany, then it becomes a little bit easier to understand that continuity, right? It's not another unit that they are in, like, no, it's the same unit, it's the same enemy that is in front of him, it's the same command structure, um, the same propaganda, the same everything basically, except for the fact that yesterday they were in what is today Lithuania, today they are in what is today uh, Russia. So like today they are in Oblast Kaliningrad, but back in the day they were in the Soviet Union one day, and they are in East Prussia, Germany, Nazi Germany the next. So that is that is where I are. Like that is where I am within my research.
And why is this? Why is this battle so important for the history of the war? Like, according to your research, why is it so important? So, you know,
Well, let me first, just completely undermine myself in so many ways. You know what? Within the grand strategy of it all, it isn't, right? There's a good reason that you have never heard of Königsberg, right? Why? Because it is one of those battles on the flanks, like the many, many battles, that lies. If you see the advance from, like the center of the Soviet Union in the summer of 1944, all the way up to Berlin, it sits just north of that, right? So all of our attention now, of course, I don't have to tell you, goes through that main advance that goes through Warsaw and then up to the Oder River and then up over the Oder and then to Berlin, right? And that's um, that's the name of the game at the day, right? So um, it's north of that, right? But to me, why, as a researcher, I could perhaps better answer that, like why it's so interesting. It is because focusing on a battle that hasn't been absolutely done to death, that could really help further the way that we understand things, because it isn't completely dominated by extremely fixed ideas of what we believe, the history to be. Also, quite simply, if you're focusing on Germany in 1945 and you try to do that through the lens of Berlin 1945, right? Well, who is in Berlin, right? Hitler is in Berlin. Goebbels is in Berlin. Bormann is in Berlin. Basically, anyone who's anyone is in Berlin, right? Which means, by the very definition, in every other city in Germany, they are not, right? So, what does this mean then? It's like, yeah, if you want to get a good sense of how life is in Germany, it makes an awful lot of sense to actually uh, focus on one of these other cities, which are big cities, like Königsberg, just before the war, has about 400,000 inhabitants. So it's not a small city. This is the capital of East Prussia, one of the most prominent provinces there is. Becomes extremely like the focus of like nationalistic pride, if you will, after the First World War, of course. Like it's the province that is now cut off through the Polish corridor, so everyone knows where it is at the time. Um, so I figured if I want to learn anything meaningfully new about Germany in the final year of the war, I shouldn't go to the historiographic room where everyone is already. I should go to the place what no one has been doing thus far. And then, you have a few options. Either you go, like, let's say, like Dusseldorf or Cologne or Aachen or like Metz, and there's a great many potential interesting cities. But I always gravitated more towards the Eastern Front. I always, yeah, like I know you guys have a very very similar outlook to this. I was like very young already. I was like, like how much more do I really need to know about D-Day? How much more do I need to know about, the Battle of Britain and like Arnhem? And uh, even though like now I know like like there's still enough to do. Like I know a great many excellent scholars who continue to do great work on this stuff, and good work will continue to come out of it. It's just that I, back in the day, long ago, made the decision I want to focus on the Eastern Front. Why? Also because to me, all the interesting questions when it comes to collaboration, complicity, bystanding, like making all these fateful choices, like death, genocide, like the Holocaust, you name it, it's all 10 times more intense on the Eastern Front. Like you can say whatever you want about like Belgium or the Netherlands or whatever. Like people die there, horrible. Like a hunger winter in the Netherlands. Like over 100,000 Jews like transported from the Netherlands to like big numbers, nothing to scoff at. And I don't want to take anything away from that. But if you compare this to sort of like the like the levels of misery that you see on the Eastern Front, it's just it's you just have to start thinking about things differently. And to me, that has always been very very exciting, and that is sort of like where I ended up in, like in the east of Europe, in the east of Germany.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said. When you learn about the war in the East, you have to start thinking about things differently because it
Yeah.
is it is extremely impactful. We've been interviewing um, quite a few specialists in the war in the East, and to me, I'm not a historian, so to me, it's quite clear that Germany waged a war of extermination to the east differently uh, from what they did in the west.
Yes.
For many reasons that if people want to learn, you can watch the other episodes. But
Yeah.
yeah. So, anyways, something I was going to ask Samuel to go for the next question, but I was when I was reading it. I thought about my grandfather. My grandfather fought the war in Greece. He was Italian. He was an Italian tank driver, and not a tank, so an armored car driver. And he came back to Italy in '44. And one of the stories he used to tell us is that they would walk in the streets and point to the former fascist government workers, like people who would work for the fascists, and would point to them and say, "We're going to get you. When the war is over, we're going to get you." And they actually got them, and they executed them all. So I was reading the question, I was like, this is going through my mind, the violence after the war. So the question is, your book shows that much of the late war violence in East Prussia was Germans against Germans, like in Italy, like Italians against Italians. Uh, but yeah, but not just Germans against the foreign enemies, right? So the question is,
Mhm.
what surprised you most about these intra-German violence when you went into the archives?
Yeah. So when I went into the archives, right, I like when you examine East Prussia, right, you have a narrative which which is still an extremely important one, right, which is the advance of the Red Army into East Prussia. And what you see is like as part of that advance, it is horrible. Like they are, like once again, like this is the first German territory in enemy hands, right? This is the first time that the Red Army steps onto German soil. they are coming with, like with revenge in mind, right? And we all know, like, this is horrible. What is happening to women, particularly, it is, like, it's just brutal, right? Obviously, I don't have to spell it out. Um, it's like, and a lot of the people who are in East Prussia at this point, like with the men, are fighting at the front, of course. So, who is this anger? Who's this wrath aimed at? It is going to be like women and children and elderly. And, I would like to think much of that we knew, right? So, my initial idea when I went into the archives and started to research this was the idea of, I want to write a work that examines the German civilian between the two belligerents, right? So, the German versus, like, the German, like navigating with the German soldiers on the one hand, and then the German civilian navigating with Red Army soldiers on the other hand, right? And that is still extremely important. As a matter of fact, that is what I'm currently doing for my current research. But uh, when you have to write a PhD, you have to come up with something original, right? So, something that has never been done in any way. You have to ask a question that's completely novel. And the longer I worked on this Soviet angle, the more I realized actually all that I'm saying has been said before. Like, sure, I've found new sources, but they all say roughly the same. Like, I'm not really adding anything new to this, like more of the same, like still extremely haunting anecdotes, and, like good stories, like the research is solid, right? I'm not, saying anything about that. But um I didn't think it was original, right? And then, coming to what you say, like, then I go into the archives, right? And what do I start finding is an angle that I really had not considered in earnest, which is, oh my God, actually, those German soldiers are behaving pretty violently towards their own civilians too, right? Because, like so many people, you go like, oh, they are there to, like, save their own population, and, like, they are going to be sort of like this heroic last stand, so to speak. And, a lot of these cliches, basically. Um, why do we have those cliches? Well, because this is what German generals wrote in their memoirs after the war. It's like, now we, of course, we know, like, yeah, maybe take those with a grain of salt, right? So, yeah, like, they have every reason to lie, and so they and so they do that, right? So, and I start to go through the documents, through the different orders, and I go like, man, like, they are behaving so brutally towards their own civilians too, who they really sort of like start to use in the defense in these massive numbers. So, like, in Königsberg, they have like something called like fortress service, where everyone, like, as the proclamation states, and it's like man, woman, and child, has to contribute to the fortress defensibility for like 4 hours a day. So it doesn't matter if you're a kid, like, I have accounts of like 8-year-old boys, and I have accounts of 70-year-old women, and everything in between. Because if you are in the fortress, you have, like, quite frankly, you have to earn the right to be defended. And if you don't comply to that, like, you are now opening yourself up to like summary judgment. Now, if you are, let's say, a militia member, like a member of the Volkssturm, for example, and you are going into hiding. Why are you going into hiding? Because you go like, I'm a 58-year-old man. I'm limping. I should not be fighting, right? So I'm just going to go into hiding, and I'm going to wait this one out, right? Which is an entirely sensible decision, very human behavior, right? And the issue is, if you are found by military like patrols, they go, hey, you should be at the front. As a matter of fact, you are a deserter, you're a defeatist, and you could very well just be executed for that. And you see that happening time and time and time again. And to me, like, once I start to look at that angle, I go like, yeah, now I have stumbled on something that is actually interesting, and let's see how big the scope is. Like, am I looking at anecdotes still, or is this something systematic? Like, is this something that is sort of like ingrained in the military system, or did I just hit a bunch of anecdotes, right? Because that's a real threat if you start to, as an academic, sort of conflate, like four or five anecdotes with, like whether it's the real thing or if it's just a few anecdotes. So I went on to see, is this ingrained in the system, or are we just dealing with a bunch of complete over the top hardliners? And what I found was like, no, actually, this is basically ingrained in the in the German army by the time that the final year of the war comes around. So that is then what I completely gravitated towards. At the time, I remember it profoundly. I just did the day that I sort of like chopped off like 50% of my PhD, the entire Soviet angle. It's like, nope, like there's nothing new there. I'm just going to focus on that German versus German element. And it's been extremely rewarding, because it's exciting. It's just something that people don't do. Um, it has also caused quite a lot of controversy when people say like, oh, you're just trying to write the Red Army out of the books, right? Like, you are ignoring the Red Army. And then I always have to say like, I really don't. Like, there's like it's just that this book is not about that, right? It's just a different book, and it's just different research. Like, everything that you hear and learn about the Red Army, I can unequivocally say it's completely true, right? And oftentimes it's even worse than we like to think it is. But it's like, sometimes it's just so gruesome that like putting it in a book would, like it would serve almost like no purpose. It's just gore. It's like horror. It's like pornographic gore. You go like, this has no place in a book. So, but yeah, like I have those sources too, and like corroborated. And but yeah, like it's just for my research, for this research, is just what I decided to not focus on. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your research. That's freaking fantastic. I mean, from all the discussions we have on internet with people from all over the world, I think the kind of research you do contributes a lot to, well, to bring reality to these people. So I'm happy to be sharing your work with our people here. So Samuel,
So
do you want to carry on?
yeah,
Yeah,
I
carry on.
actually
Go
had
ahead.
a question because so I read your book, and there's one particular story that stood out to me, and it was Ernst Tilbury.
Ernst Tilley.
Tilbury.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on one hand, he's celebrated as a hero because I believe, he destroyed a couple of Soviet tanks, and
Hmm.
he's awarded the Knight's Cross. But elsewhere, you also mentioned that and correct me if I'm wrong, he shot his commanding officer. He was a Volkssturmman.
Hmm.
And for me, that was like, okay, so on one hand, like they're celebrating him because of what he did, but also because he shot someone that was perceived as a
Yeah.
coward.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so yeah, for me, that was like that was a real eye opener. If you have the chance, by all means, go read the book. But so in your book, you talk about the barbarized mindset of the Wehrmacht, of the German soldiers, and how did this mindset actually play out once these soldiers, arrived in Germany or in East Prussia or in cities like Königsberg?
Yeah. So the idea of the barbarization of warfare, right? This is your classical 1985 Omar Bartov idea that I hope many of your viewers and listeners will be familiar with, right? So, but just as one sentence, if there's one thing you need to know about the Eastern Front, is that for 3 years on end, the German army just behaved absolutely abysmally, right? Like massive acts of genocide, war crimes, like in every way, shape, size that you can imagine. Like scorched earth policies, like all of it, right? And then a million times over, right? So that has been firmly established. That is not something that I seek to challenge, or like this is so well established by now. Like book upon book will, like the divisional history upon this, like will reflect on that in some way, shape, or form. So my question then became, okay, you have been behaving like this for 3 years, right? This has been your unit. This has been your home, like your spiritual home. This is like your moral framework. Like after 3 years, like like do something for 3 years, it becomes ingrained, right? So now my question is then, could you fall back on your own territory? Can you just leave those ingrained behaviors behind? I think not, right? So that is how I squared the findings of my archive to like the overall argument of my book. So yes, of course these guys are behaving brutally because that's all that they've ever did for the last 3 years. I, as far as they are concerned, I am firmly convinced that they think they behaved less brutally than they did before, if only because they did. It's still extremely brutal coming from the civilian perspective. Like they have no idea what is happening. Like if you are like to stay to the example that we used earlier, if you are that 58-year-old man, you go like, what is happening to me? Like, how is this guy not seeing this soldier, this officer not seeing that what he's asking of me is absolutely insane, right? I should not be on the front lines. I should be evacuated. I should get out of this city. I should be protected. I should not be protecting, right? And how can you understand that? Well, you can understand it by keeping in mind that this is precisely what this officer has been doing for years on end, and probably like worse still. And now, yeah, just feels completely uh, correct in doing this. So that is, yeah, that and where does this play out in its extreme? Well, of course, in the first province where the German army is going to fall back in, namely is Prussia.
It's awesome because this breaks completely that romanticized like idea we see on internet of unified heroic Germany fighting together against the menace of communism and everything that people keep reproducing on internet, the Nazi propaganda from that time
Mhm.
nowadays. Like Samuel opened my eyes to this, and it's exactly what people do nowadays. They exactly repeat the same kind of BS the propaganda back then were. Like what you said just shatters it completely. And I think Samuel wanted to say something. You want to say something? No. Your
You're on mute.
microphone. Your mic. Yeah.
I was thinking about what you said, that the commander of the in Königsberg, Otto Lasch, if I pronounce it correctly.
Perfectly.
So he has written his memoirs, and in your research, you also show that. So he justifies it as like I'm putting up resistance, yeah, to protect the civilians. But then after it, it's like, yeah, you show like, okay, these are the surrender conditions, and he doesn't mention the civilians at all. There's nothing about like protecting them or safeguarding them.
No, like absolutely.
No.
And like in the meantime, like after I published this book, like this book came out in like 2021, and obviously I continue to do my research, right? Because I'm still interested in it. I continue to be interested in it, right? And by now I've also found sort of the letters that he writes to the publisher, because I was just interested in like how is the process of this book coming out, right? And turns out that he really doesn't write much. Like it's actually much of his book is actually ghost written. Like he basically, like, if you go to his memoirs again, which I then did after like seeing what his ghostwriter actually asks of the publisher, because the ghostwriter just says, I feel I should get a cut of the profits because I've wrote this freaking thing actually. The general was absolutely unwilling to put anything on paper, and he's extremely unwilling to do anything meaningful. It's all platitudes. Um, yeah, like it's so interesting to see. Like he doesn't want to write his memoirs at all because like he knows that he hasn't done as much as he claims. Like so, which I then compared as like more of a fun exercise for myself. Like, what does he really like to talk about? Hunting. Like this guy loves like a good Prussian aristocrat, which he claims to be. He's not Prussian, but he claims to be sort of like Prussian-esque. Say, oh, he loves hunting, right? Like upper crust behavior. You have to hunt, right? He will write page after page, like hundreds of pages of all hunting exploits. Like at the time that he is commanding a unit, like during the siege of Leningrad, he finds time to go hunting, and there are pictures of it and everything, right? And he's extremely into that, and he writes page after page, and after his history, like this guy cannot get enough of writing, right? When it comes to hunting, when he has to say something meaningful, it's like, mm-mm. So it's extremely interesting to see that change of attitude. And going like through his memoirs, like he really just he knows that he has to mention that he's safeguarding the civilians, right? Because that becomes like the Wehrmacht's purpose after the Second World War. Like, oh, we were defending like civilians from the Soviets all along. And obviously there's much truth to that. Like it's not that I'm completely denying that either, of course. But yes, like it's like if you read like contemporary orders, like the civilians like they are like if like and I use quite a lot in my book, like as you've seen somewhere, like they like sometimes they have literal lists of where civilians rank. And it's like on a list of six, they are sixth, right? Or like a list of 10, they are 10th, or like a list of fourth, they're fourth. They're always at the bottom. Like they are there, but it's like it's after like I've also like listed like like below horses or something like this. Like first get the horses out, right? Or first get the cows out. Like also like like because cows, like we need cows to like feed the army. Therefore, like get the cows out. Like civilians can like take care of themselves, and like you even then have like official like party documents that say like, oh, civilians that are falling in enemy hands, they are no longer to be seen as traitors. Like what? So like apparently they were like even potentially even seen as traitors, which to me it's just yeah. So like
Insane,
there's
boggers.
uh, because I think what we very quickly forget, I should say, like too quickly forget, is that um, we never really want to engage with the fact that the Wehrmacht is a Nazi invention, right? Uh, we do the intellectually lazy thing where we just say, oh, not all Germans were Nazis. Okay, that's correct. I'm not like denying that at all. But in the same way, if you are now serving in whichever army you're serving in, let's say, like I'm in Britain, so let's say like the British Army, like how are you going to become a 3-star general, 4-star general, or whatever it may be? It's like by at least like embodying the values of the country that you are protecting, right? That is important, right? So place that within the concept of 1945 Nazi Germany. Well, what do you see? Yeah, like some of these guys are, you know, maybe not like full blown genocidal maniacs from the highest level, but they are not disagreeing with it either, right? They, like they have embodied a lot of these virtues.
Good introduction for the next question. Because yeah, we were talking about Otto Lasch and his memoirs, and much of the popular memory still treats the Wehrmacht as separate from or less guilty than the Nazi Party. But how does your research on the defense of Koningsberg, challenge that perception of the Wehrmacht?
Well, let's answer this from two directions, right? So the first one being um, like the party, right? Like if you talk about like the party, like within inverted commas. Uh, by now, there's also like a lot of research that indicates like what does it even mean to like be a party member, right? Because a lot of people say, I joined because I had to join. I joined because like it was the only way to get a steady career. Like I joined just to get attention away from me. I just joined because everyone was joining. Like there's a million and one reasons why you will join the Nazi party if you are a German in the latter half of the 1930s. That really still don't really show anything meaningfully about National Socialism. Like Lush also joins the party. I don't even really think that he's like a super hardcore Nazi. Like he's sort of like a run of the mill general. Like in a way, I like him because he is so standard, right? Like there's, so if you keep that in mind, right? If you already start to think like, yeah, but like joining the party or whatever the party is in the minds of a great many people, uh, also doesn't necessarily mean that you are like a hardcore Nazi. Well, like then very much the same thing can be said about like the army, right? But then from the exact opposite point of view. Once again, I'm not saying that everyone who is in the like the Wehrmacht, like given that it's a Nazi machinery, a Nazi organization, everyone in the Wehrmacht is a Nazi. Like no, uh, but what the Nazi, or sorry, what the Wehrmacht is a fair representation of the Germany of that time. And in that Germany of that time, there were just as many Nazis as that you feel there are, right? Which is a great many, right? But now we have done very often that sort of like lazy trick where we say like, oh, not everyone was, like in the Wehrmacht was a Nazi. Okay, yes, that's true, but that still implies that there are a great many were, right? So, and then it's up to you as a researcher or aspiring historian or whatever you may be to establish whether behaviors, like can be rooted in National Socialism, like or not. Because, like once again, like there are a great many behaviors in the German Wehrmacht that are just perfectly regular, like military operations, right? Or um, you will find very similar thing, let's say, in British colonial practice, like too, right? In like 19th century colonial warfare has, like horrid elements to it too, right? So you should also not conflate horribleness with Nazism, right? Like that's not the same thing. So rather you want to investigate like where does this specific behavior come from, right? And like is this something that has been fostered over the last 12 years of National Socialism, like it's 1945, so like since 1933, and that is how you have to approach that question. So there is not a good army and an evil party. That's a very useless way of looking at things, as far as I'm concerned. I hope that answers sort of your question. It's yeah.
Yeah. Samuel wants to make one question, but I would just wanted to add one thing. Um, Back at the beginning of my page, when I started to read, I've always liked World War II, but I read a book from Martin Gilbert. It's called World War II, the book. I don't know if you guys know it.
Mhm.
But at the beginning of the book, he mentions, I don't even know if it's a good book, right? I just read it,
It, it,
whatever.
it,
But
it's a
it's
long book. It's a little bit of its time, but nonetheless, yeah.
yeah. So he mentions that something you were talking before, like the concerns of some officers in the German army when they were watching these orders coming through to execute civilians and everything.
Hmm.
And they started to write back home, like, what is to be expected of these soldiers when they get back home because they're shooting
Yeah,
kids in the head here.
yeah,
Then they're going to have to come back at some point. Like, what's going to
yeah,
be of our nation
yeah.
when these guys come back? Just wanted to add that little detail because this always resonates in my head. But anyways, Samuel, go ahead, make your question.
No, we were talking about the Wehrmacht. We were talking about the Nazi Party, but there's also the civilians. They're civilians trapped in Königsberg. Yeah, they're under martial law, and they're treated by the soldiers according to the standards of those soldiers.
Of
Can
martial law,
you?
they're under
Yeah,
martial law, right?
yeah.
So they are effectively treated like soldiers are treated.
Hmm.
Like obviously the practice will be slightly different, but yeah, like they are under martial law.
Hmm. Can you describe what life in the city was like for them?
Yeah, so if you are of working age, and that's very broadly conceived, uh, you would be drafted in a a work battalion, say, right? And you would be asked to dig defensive positions, right? If you're a woman, for example, like this is something that you can absolutely do, right? You can hold a shovel, you can dig earth, right? Maybe not something that you're terribly used to, but you can do it. Like you don't need any special skills for that, right? If you're a man, maybe like you haul the trees of the local park that have been cut down to turn into the actual defensive positions themselves, right? Because this a woman cannot do. She's not strong enough, so to speak. Okay, good. So woman does the digging, for example, man does the hauling. So they're like very very cliched, right? So this is what would happen to you. So you would be asked as well. Let's stick to the female example here. You would be marched in the morning to the outskirts of the city, or you would be asked to report at a specific place at the outskirts of the city, and then you're there working for 4 hours. Hopefully, you're not in the reach of artillery shelling, because you best believe that the Red Army is ranging the entire city. Will drop every now and then. They'll drop a grenade so that they precisely know that when the full artillery barrage is going to begin, um, then it will hit its targets. So yes, you are building those defensive positions. You might be strafed by a plane. Obviously, it's quite literal backbreaking work very often, and that is what you would be asked to do. So that's that could be a unfortunately very standard day in the life of a woman. Then afterwards, you're still expected to do your chores. If you're really good national socialist or someone very committed to it, you would then volunteer, or like volunteer, like you're being voluntold basically, to, for example, go to the hospital where you're going to help the wounded. Uh, that could be your day. In the meantime, by the way, you're absolutely worrying sick about your little boy, who is, let's say, 8 years old, who at this point in time is asked by German soldiers to use his sled to hold grenades, because like that's another source that I have, or the beauty about being a small 8-year-old boy is like you're like yay high, right? You're like a small boy, which means like you can run through the trenches. You don't even have to to crouch, and you can pass artillery coordinates, right? You're extremely hard to target by Soviet snipers, for example. So to little boys, this is super exciting, right? And so like they will then also like help, or have another account where it's like like go help mine a bridge. It's like
Man, this brings me to Jojo Rabbit.
yeah,
The
no, but like
movie Jojo.
I really this sounds like I really like Jojo Rabbit. Like
I really
obviously,
like it too.
oh, I mean, I think it's really excellent because that is precisely like obviously they play it over the top, but I think the reason that you sort of have to play it over the top is because if you were just to focus on the reality, like no one would believe it. Like now, the good thing is about Jojo Rabbit is like, oh, it's comical. No, all those 8-year-old boys, like, oh, they're ready to go. He also says in his memoirs, like, oh, like I had some boys and they were like 12 and 13 and they were like proper Hitler Youth boys. I was so jealous of them because they got to fight. And like it's a wild idea for us nowadays, right? So, but on the other hand, completely understandable. Like I remember being an 8-year-old boy, like, and my dad got like gave me a pocket knife, right? Oh man, how was that not the most awesome thing I ever got as a present, right? It's like like it's sort of like you have ascended into manhood, right? It's the greatest thing ever, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah, so
Manhood is
yes,
puts you up.
so and to these young boys. Oh, they think it's amazing. Like to them, it's all like a one big playground. Like at some point, he says to his mother, "Oh, I think that like American planes are taking part in the bombing of the city." And his mother goes like, "No, like they don't, because the Americans don't fly here, right?" And he's like, I think they do though. And so, it's this 8-year-old boy talking to his mother about this. And like his mother is right that the Americans as a whole, they are not flying there, but the Americans have supplied planes to the Red Army. And so he spots them because like he has, like any young boy has those booklets where you can learn the shapes of the planes like by heart, basically. Like what is the silhouette of the planes? Like, oh, if it does this, it's that plane. And at some point, like one of those planes comes down, and then like he immediately goes to that plane, and then he gets out some of the board equipment with American lettering on it, and goes to his mother. It's like, see, it's like American. Like he's so happy about it, right? And you go, like his mother is go like, have you just gone through the burning wreckage of a plane? It's like, yes. And to kids, it's amazing, but like it's super dangerous, of course, because like the plane comes down, like any war plane comes down, you shouldn't even be there as a 8-year-old boy. But of course, you get it. It's so exciting, like so, and you can weaponize that, right? Which is precisely what happens, right? So that boy's curiosity, it's sort of like like of an 8-year-old, like the drive of a 15-year-old boy. Oh man, like is there anything like more hyper than a 15-year-old boy? We have all been 15-year-old boys. Like you could, like if you could tell me like what, like run into the general direction of a machine gun with 10 of your friends, you're just going to do it. It's like, and that's this precisely what happens in Königsberg too, right? Like I'm not being like hyperbolic. Like this is precisely what happens. Like by the time, so like this is like a big aspect of that violence. It's not like the same type of violence, but you have a division, like the First Infantry Division, a division that is traditionally mustered in Königsberg. Actually, has been like it's been a garrison city for hundreds of years. Actually, it's a true proper East Prussian division. Has been defending East Prussian territory ferociously or fiercely, I should say, sorry, like for months at this point. So it's been really like the numbers are down. By the time it arrives in Königsberg, it's in tatters. But it starts to rebuild. But where are you going to find troops? There are no all. It's February 1945. All the men are long at the front. So who are you going to find? It's 15-year-old Hitler Youth boys, right? And here's the good thing about 15-year-old Hitler Youth boys. If you send them forward, like with literally 700, at the time, and you just have them run into the nearest enemy position, which is precisely what happens, they will do that. But here's the good thing: uh, the strength of your division has really not suffered that much from it, because you just have used Hitler Youth boys who 2 weeks later were not part of your division anyway. But your division can now say, we have captured that position. So like, well done, First Infantry Division. And they say like, oh, like it's such a great chapter in the history of our division. And like they immediately start to invoke, like perhaps or like your listeners know, like Langemark, like in the First World War, where you also have like all these youths who are like singing like the German national anthem, like sort of like run into the machine guns of the enemy, and they all die in a valiant way, but like they die like true German patriots. And like say, oh, this is precisely what happens there, such proud young boys. And then he says like the commanding officer says like, and then I had to go to to the mothers, and I had to tell their mothers about the glorious deaths of their boys. It's like, yeah, I don't think those mothers share that sentiment though, right? So yeah, so like it's that level of yeah, uh, like violence that cannot be separated from National Socialism, right? So like it is here where you see that complete radicalized mindset that has been molded in this war of worldviews, in this like in this like in this conflict that we've never seen before, that they're just bringing it back, right? Like they already didn't give a flying shit about any civilians to begin with, and now it's their own civilians, and they still really don't. Like on the tin, they say they do, and I really believe that some of them really feel that they believe they care about them, but push comes to shove, they will just send hundreds of kids uh, into these lines, and it becomes this perfect narrative of like heroism. But like the other day, really, I found a account from the Soviet perspective, because the defense of this particular position is basically organized around flamethrowers, right? So they say like, yeah, then we, like they came in, like first they went into the crossfire of the machine gun, and once they approached 20 meters from our lines, we opened 10 flamethrowers at the same time. So you go like, yeah, that's, man, you know, this is how you go out, right? Like this, 15-year-old boy, you've known nothing but National Socialism, completely indoctrinated, and you just die on fire. Like how is that heroic, right? But within that narrative, this is truly the epitome of, like this, this is what you have to be, right? Yeah. So I go like, yeah, not much of that remains, but yeah, like it's deeply like this is why I call it like violence in defeat. It's like it's like it's this type of violence. It's not like only lashing out against others, not only like hanging like fellow compatriots. Sure, like obviously, like if you were to read my book, which I hope at least some of your readers, or some of your listeners, sorry, will uh, there's much of that, yes. But like to me, the violence also lies in this sort of like it's just gratuitous, um, like casualty making of basically of civilians. Like everyone knows that they are civilians. Like once again, I have like other memoirs where like the NCO, this is like I feel sorry for them. Like that's like one day before you have this NCO of this the Fifth Panzer Division, which like another like major division who takes part of this like specific breakout, and like he's asked to start training like these new recruits. This is on the 17th of February that he has to start the training, right? On the 19th of February, 2 days later, they start their attack. Like, how well are you going to be trained in 2 days? Like, you are not going to be trained at all in 2 days. And he just says, like, I feel sorry for them. And, because, yeah, like these people you can just sacrifice, like without really compromising the strength of your division, because like they're glorified civilians, and we have just constructed this narrative in which like they are not civilians, at least on the tin, but we all know that they are, though, right? And they will act as if they are. So to me, yeah, that like once those things sort of started to explore, and this is also why I was so happy that I decided to focus just on Königsberg, because it forces you to really like zero in on like any like street neighborhood, like you name it. You cannot make broad statements about, oh, Germany in 1945. Like I can make some, obviously, and reasonably well informed, I guess. But like to me, like just by examining just like this nitty gritty, it's like like go see who these boys are. Like go think about their mothers for a second, right? Uh, what goes through their minds? Like they're like yeah, like to me, once you are at that level, like now you're doing something new. So like I'm very yeah, I'm also very aware that I feel that I have like a responsibility as a historian, like to tell this story, right? Because if you stick stubbornly to the story of German armies like defending against like the Bolshevik hordes, right? And there's still absolute a lot of truth to that, right? I'm not like taking anything necessarily away from that, but um, a lot of this other stuff goes lost, right? So Like we don't reflect on that at all, right? Like, and to me, like there should at least be one person, so let that be me, who tells that story too, right? So that is what I see as my duty.
So,
And also, sorry to interrupt you, but it's also um, important to demystify all this myth of the brave Germany fighting to the end, like the this last, like the Mein Kampf, my own struggle against these foreigner enemies trying to destroy Germany and blah 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 that people keep repeating nowadays. And something I would like to add is that most of these boys, 15-year-old boys, they were born into Nazism, so
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
excited about it, right? They are.
They have known nothing else. Like like I'm always like to draw a parallel with today. Right, you have boys who were born under Putin and they have by now died under Putin. Like it's the same. Like Putin comes into power basically, January 2000 or December 1999, depending on how you want to slice it. And yeah, like if you are a 22-year-old man in 2022 and you die somewhere outside of Kiev or wherever it may be, this is the only thing you have known, right? And it's the same for these Hitler youths. Like they, like yeah, sure they are 15, so theoretically they've known three pre-Hitler years. But I don't know anything about years 0 to 3 in my life. So like effectively that's all they have known, and that is what they have died for. And yeah.
So yeah, as we move towards the end, Samuel will make us our last question. And do you want to say something before I go on, Samuel?
no, no, no. I'll take over then.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So
So go go.
we'll do a bit different last question than planned. But throughout the conversation, you mentioned that you were doing research after the book. You published an article on I believe, the Palmnicken massacre.
Mhm.
Is there anything you would like to tell us about your recent research?
Yeah. So now, what I want to do is I want to write a book about like the entire defense of East Prussia, where I also once again incorporate, like the Red Army's cruelties, right? Because if anything, if I realized anything over the last years, like people are, or like years, I should say, like people just are interested in that, right? And there is a lot of extremely poor research on it. Like so, quite frankly, I am running on the anger of poor previous scholarship. Like that fuels me. So it's like, oh man, like they are so wrong. Scholars that have come before. It's a lot of amateur historians, like people with no training, and But what it does show me is that people are interested in it. Like these books sell by lack of a better word, right? And I figured, well, why don't I then take that on myself? Like I already have explored this interesting angle. I'd like to think that I can think about things in a creative manner. I already have the sources. Like I've been like well before I started any of this research. Like I did this for my undergraduate too. I did this for my master's and then for my PhD. I've been basically doing this since I could think independently for myself, basically, right? And like before that, like a great many of us, I imagine I was already like this history buff, right? So already like in my teens, I'm already interested in the Second World War. I'm already interested in the Eastern Front, right? So at this point I figured, like, yeah, you know what, I am well placed to write that freaking book. So let's just do it then, right? So, and then indeed, like Palmnicken massacre. So what is this? You have 6,500 Jews who are led from Stutthof through Königsberg to a coastal town by the name of Palmnicken. By the time that the Jewish prisoners arrive at Palmnicken, already 3,000 have died on the way. Like, don't forget, at this point, it's January 1945. It's minus 20 to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and they are precisely dressed as you have them in mind, like in those striped things. It's horrible. Like it's you might as well be naked at this point, right? So just and they have nothing with them. They're already completely emaciated to begin with, and then they are going to be marched for, I don't know the exact distance, but let's say like let's say roughly 100 miles, in horrid conditions. And the moment that you fall behind, like a guard will shoot you, right? And how are they marching? Like they're marching right through East Prussia. Everyone sees them. No one stops them. No one helps them go into hiding. Only after this massacre takes place, like about, let's say, 50-ish people survive. Like some of them go into hiding with the local population. Some are immediately turned over to the SS as well, but at least some managed to survive. But yeah, like by the time they reached Palmniken, 3,000 are still alive. They're basically uh, pushed, if you will, or forced on the ice, because like also like this is the Baltic Sea that we're talking about. The first parts of the Baltic Sea are at this point frozen. They're forced on the ice, and then the machine guns are put on them. This is the biggest massacre of this type that there is. So it's like it's a 0.0% chance of survival from the moment that they start marching in late January 1945 from the different sub camps of Stutthof concentration camp to Balmniken. And what to me was interesting, like once more, because like at this point I'm thinking, like I've all the military documents, so I go like, okay, but we blame DSS for it, like DSS broadly conceived. Obviously, no one has really looked under the hood in any meaningful way. I was like, yeah, but hold on, they go right through the area of operations. Like it's the army that is in charge here. It's the army who has to sign off on things, right? And here, for example, like one of the reasons that Lush, like General Lush, like he stays in Soviet captivity until 1955. If you stay into Soviet captivity until 1955, what does this mean? Is the Soviets think that you are an actual war criminal. Like most German soldiers, despite once again a lot of myth making surrounding it, are actually out by 1948 ish, right? The vast majority. But then there's still a very large group of tens of thousands of German soldiers who are still in the Soviet Union, right? But those are potential war criminals, and there's cases against them. Like, and one of these cases, like unsurprisingly, is against Lush, which also once again shows very clearly why you wouldn't want to write too much about it, right? One letter wrong, and you start to implicate yourself. So, um, and like in his, because he also writes a small memoir of his time in captivity, like portraying himself as the victim, which to me as a scholar is it's infuriating. But okay, whatever. And it's like, oh, I have no idea why they charged me. Like, yes, you do though, right? You know damn well why. Like this group of Jews goes right through through the city of which you are the fortress commander. You are, prior to being the fortress commander, you are the head of the, like it's called the Wehrkreis. So like you are like head of the local like reserve army structure. I will spare you the details here, but basically you know extremely well what is happening in the province. Like there's no person better placed to know exactly what is happening on the ground as this guy, right? And so I've just basically retraced every command. So you have different like divisional commands. You have corps command, army command, like fortress command, army group command. So like just made a list of all the commands that are potentially involved, and let's see like where they intersect with this death march. And yeah, just see like like who knew what or who could know what, because like the idea about death marches very often is that they sort of like go to this administrative no man's land, right? To say if you see the pictures, it all feels very lonely, which it is like like from the victim's point of view, like never have you ever felt so alone and forgotten by the world, except you're going, like someone knows where you're going, right? Someone has given those orders, right? You might think that you are um uh, not being looked after, but someone knows where you're going, right? And to me, this is wildly fascinating. So I've reconstructed that. At this point, like perhaps like if you just want to end on a very sombering note, because why not at this point? Um, like one of the Stutthof concentration camp, right? Like this is where these Jews are coming from. Uh, a great many Jews are there still afterwards, like a few thousand of them. As a matter of fact, when is Stutthof concentration camp? When does it stop functioning? Well, only on the 7th of May 1945. It remains in German hands, it remains active until the last day, right? And here comes the kicker, right? If you want to flee as an East Prussian out of East Prussia, um, there's only a finite number of ways. Quite frankly, it's only two, three ways out, right? One of these ways goes right past Stutthof concentration camp, and Stutthof concentration camp also then just happens to be one of the very few places where people can have shelter. What does this mean? And this is, to me, it's absolutely wild, is that you have East Prussian refugees in Stutthof concentration camp, yards away from Jewish inmates. Do they mention anything about it in their memoirs? You best believe they don't, because it's their victim narrative, right? And army staffs are there too. And who then, to my personal like frustration, go on to complain about how dirty the quality in the concentration camp is. Like, oh, like we were so poorly taken care of. It's like, good lord, like you have, like it's just completely aloof of of anything. It's like
Oh my
so
God.
yeah, no, like it's really mad. It's so maddening. It's just very, very frustrating if you read these sort of things. So yes, I mean,
So
yeah.
yeah, this was the last question. But before we go, don't forget to check out Bastian's book here in the description of this episode. You're going to find a link to his book,
Well, hold it up
Violence
for
in
me.
Defeat. Sorry? Ah, yeah,
There you
there's the
go.
book over
Yeah.
there. You can buy it when you buy a book like this one. For example, you're not only supporting Bastian, but also all these chain of historians and people who are working really hard to bring you the truth and not these broken, weird, crazy ass narratives you see around internet. The second thing is, Bastian, we would like to have you back here when you publish your second book, or if you have anything in mind, like I would come back to talk about, I don't know, anything you would like to just email Samuel, you
Yeah.
email us, and
No,
we're
I've
going to be here
thoroughly
for you.
enjoyed this. We could absolutely, I'd love to return. It's been great, great fun, even though it's been extremely, extremely grim. I think we've only skimmed the surface, right? So there's still a lot left to discuss, and yeah, I'd love to be back, guys.
That would be amazing. And yes, we are always looking for good guests, and you for sure will be in our list. So, as Boston said, this conversation barely scratches the surface, so you have to buy his book to deeply go
Yes.
into these matters. Yeah, right? Stay tuned on Instagram. There's a lot going on. We're promoting books, we're selling trips, and there's a lot going on. Samuel, do you like to give your final words, please?
If you've come to this part of the episode, don't forget to like and subscribe, as well as comment your thoughts below.
Perfect. Bastian, any last words?
No, like as I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yes, like I hope that like your audience like starts thinking about like the province of East Prussia and the people who lived there, like who struggled through these areas, like through this era. And yes, they are always very close to me. Um, and yes, I feel their voice should be heard. And yeah, Like I hope that today I helped them at least a little bit.
That's awesome because this is what this show is all about: is bringing the voices from the past alive and telling their true stories, trying to avoid all the distortions and propaganda surrounding them. So thank you very much. As Samuel said, if you came all the way to the end, subscribe, like, and leave us a comment. Stay tuned on Instagram and here. I'll see you guys on the next episode of the World War II Daily Podcast. Thank you very much, Bastiaan and Samuel. See you guys.